So anyway, I think I will just give the name. So welcome, Robin. Do you see this? Yes, now you see it. Great. No, that's not the one. Sorry, that's the final session. So I'll just stop this. Okay, I'm back. Apologies. So now we are welcoming the second panel. So Grégory, are you here and microphone open, ready to take over?
I'm ready.
Okay, so over to you, Grégory.
Thanks a lot. So thanks to all the speakers also. The first part of the event was very interesting. Now we would like to discuss a little bit more on the digital sovereignty and the importance of encryption within it. So to speak about that, we have another panel of experts. So we'll start with Robin Wilton, but I see already connected. You are the Internet Society's Director on Internet Trust and a specialist in online privacy and digital identity with over 30 years of experience in systems engineering, consulting, and industry analyst roles. So then we have Remi Geraud-Stewart from GEODE. So I cannot count the number of degrees from PhD to MSc. You are a cryptologist, but also a security researcher, a member of the information security group of the Ecole normale supérieure. And last but not least, we have Alban Feraud. Alban, who worked during a long time in the field of security certification, including common criteria, but also in the management of numerous security certification projects within IDEMIA, common criteria, FIPS, etc. And today you're speaking as the president of Eurosmart, as I already mentioned, and me. I'm working for SECURITYMADEIN.LU, so the cybersecurity agency for the Luxembourg economy and municipalities. And today, as mentioned, we'll address this question of sovereignty. So to start it quickly, maybe we can see this point, which is the fact that based on the Atlantic Council 2021 results, something like 80% of the world data are located in the US. It sounds both normal and really incredible as a result of the diversification of the internet, but also as we see a lot of different service providers also working within the market. Unfortunately, we have reached this moment where we as Europe, we have to, and we want especially to strengthen our autonomy. And it has become a strategic goal for the EU, the Commission, and several member states. The idea in this is to discover how encryption can be a key instrument in strengthening sovereignty and autonomy for the EU. What are the strengths of EU companies? And to do so, the main question is, can we bring to the table? So maybe to start, I will ask you, Robin, what are the most important aspects of the sovereignty discourse for you personally? And then we might move on to Remi and Alban.
Sure, thank you, Gregory. And thank you to Jean-Christophe and Encryption Europe for hosting this. It's a privilege to be here, especially with such distinguished company. For me personally, and this is not necessarily any kind of policy position on the Internet Society's part, but I think sovereignty is one of those words we have to be very careful about in the tech policy debate, because first, it can mean whatever you want it to mean. And second, no one ever says that they want less of it. Yeah, if you say to someone, would you like less sovereignty or less money? They will generally say, no, I think I'd like more of each of those, thank you. And so it's kind of, it's the opening round of fire in some of these arguments. It's putting something up that only an idiot would challenge, of course sovereignty is good, of course you want more of it. So I think we need to be very careful what it is that we are talking about. So a couple of thoughts about where the word sovereignty might take us. The first one I think is, and here again, this is my personal opinion as someone happening to be in the UK at the moment, sovereignty for its own sake doesn't get you anything. This is a lesson that my fellow countrymen have learned painfully over the last 5 years, despite having been warned that this was the case. Sovereignty is useful if it lets you do certain things. And originally, of course, it was there to ensure that you could protect your citizens, to maintain nationhood, and to ensure that you have sovereign power over things like law enforcement in your own jurisdiction. And if you look at those three things, protect your citizens, maintain nationhood, and retain sovereign territorial power of your own jurisdiction, some of those things simply are not threatened by the online world. The online world does not threaten states' ability to protect their citizens. It does not threaten their ability to maintain nationhood, whatever that means in the 21st century. And it doesn't affect their sovereign territorial power over their own jurisdiction. So in many cases, technology doesn't actually impact sovereignty in a negative way. It gives states the power, for example, to inspect their citizens and their citizen data and doings in ways that have never been possible before. That, if anything, is a massive increase, certainly in the state power aspect of sovereignty. So, I mean, I think that's the sort of context in which we ought to think about what sovereignty means. And then maybe we can come on to the more technical questions about things like how you protect data of your citizens that is located in another jurisdiction, or what are the impacts of standards and agreements that facilitate the cross-border flow of data. But I think those are technical topics that we can get onto in a second.
Solid introduction. So Remi, if you can take the lead.
Okay, well, can you hear me all right?
Perfect.
Yeah. So let me first start by saying I completely agree with what Robin just said. I think he really strikes the matter right in the heart of it. The notion of sovereignty is not neutral. It's not a word that has a set meaning and that refers to a reality that we all agree on. It is part of a discourse. And one important point on top of what you just said, which is absolutely correct and I support, is that the notion of sovereignty is brought up by countries as a means to legitimate actions that they are taking or that they want to take. And it's important, I think, to recall that the word sovereignty is actually something that was brought up in the early 2000s in the realm of numeric sovereignty, I mean, digital sovereignty, by authoritarian countries to begin with, by China, Russia, were bringing this notion up as a means to control and to inspect their own infrastructures and their own citizens. And it's only been taken by other powers and lately by Europe, joining the bandwagon of trying to control, inspect, and more generally have an internal view of what their own citizens are doing. So one has to be extremely careful not to confuse the notion of digital sovereignty that we are going to discuss with the notion of keeping something that other countries are trying to get out of our hands, because that's not exactly the setting in which it's being discussed. So that's just the preliminary introduction to this. I just want to point out before I leave the third person to talk a bit, that our group has just recently published, and it's going to be soon available to the public, a book on this very matter of defining sovereignty, and I should rather say pointing out the different various definitions that have been used for the last 20 years the discourses and practices of digital sovereignty, and it's going to be published starting at the end of the year.
Twice as solid. Thanks a lot for that. And Alban, if you can keep going.
Yeah, thanks a lot. So I tend to agree with what the two former persons said. I would say that sovereignty in the digital world, I think it is important, and I think it has to do with what we saw in last century regarding. I think this is what, as of today, what it was in the past when we were talking about industrial sovereignty or technology sovereignty. I think for our countries to be in control of the new technological trend is really of the utmost importance, to ensure actually that they are fully in control of their political decision of the way they want to adopt. And I think in that regard, I think it's a very important concept. And I'm glad to see actually that Europe is more and more conscious of those aspects, because we see more and more artifacts of that in the technical policy that are launched by the Commission.
I would say that I have to agree with the three of you, obviously. And to keep going in the same line, we say that, yeah, there's a difference between different types of sovereignty, but also we have to see that sovereignty, especially in the technical side, and the technical aspect is also a way for a country to be the master of its own destiny, and to also have the power for any type of group to have a say. And today it's quite complicated. So when we know, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, that we have this situation of, let's call it technological dependence for the best and the worst, maybe. What are your reflections, your thoughts about this concept, this situation? Robin, maybe.
Okay. Yeah. Well, so one of the fantastic things about working for the Internet Society is the extent to which I've been able to experience the IT, the tech policy debate in emerging economies, in emerging countries, and I can tell you that, for instance, at the African Union Commission, almost all the member states are concerned at the extent to which they depend on technology products from elsewhere. And so just as the European Commission has a strategy for Europe to do with self-sufficiency, managing our own technical destiny, so the African Union Commission has parallel concerns about Africa's ability to develop advanced technology of its own, and to reduce its dependence on third-party countries to provide telecommunications, IT services, and so on. And particularly in the area of encryption, I think that can be a really acute concern. And I say that because of the number of examples that I think we can all think of, including in Europe, where the encryption product supply chain has been compromised. So for instance, I mean, the now I think almost ancient history example of crypto AG, where cryptographic hardware devices were manufactured and distributed to governments who were told that they were trustworthy, only to find later on that actually foreign country intelligence agencies had ensured that those machines were compromised and that all the traffic could be intercepted fairly easily. So this idea of the integrity of the cryptographic supply chain should be a pressing concern to every country in terms of its own sovereignty, its ability to communicate securely for its own national purposes, and its ability to ensure that its citizens and its businesses can also communicate with the level of security that products claim to deliver.
Thanks a lot. One of you want to provide an additional complementary answer? Yeah, please.
I can, please. So I think this is technology dependence. I think it is very important, and especially now, where actually we're in an age where information is very important. And actually here, technology dependence when it comes to information has direct implication with really policy orientation, choices of states, but also breakthrough research and development. So if a country or close country are not able to be in control of the technologies that are used to convey information, to exchange information, the risk actually to this information to be tampered with, to be captured, to be spied by third parties, which could have substantial consequences. So the former person, Robin, quoted the example of crypto AG. I think this has quite important consequences in history, because it was really used in key moments of the second half of the 20th century. And here I think it's even more important, because we're talking about disruptive technologies, AI and so on and so forth, where actually research are very, very important. And it could be interesting for some country to try to get back in the race by capturing the result of some R&D or university teams. And I think in that regard, it's very important.
Thanks a lot. And as you mentioned, crypto AG, for example, that would be one of the topic, I think, or at least one of the backthoughts that we will have in mind during the next roundtable, because the idea is definitely to switch from this one, talking about digital sovereignty, and then slowly discussing about the hard discussion between law enforcement agencies, the need, but also intelligence services and civil society. So let's say that it is need to tackle this type of discussion to understand the full prisma. Maybe Remi, you would like to add something?
Yes, one point I think that matters is it's true there is a technical debt and a technical concern about how much we depend on other countries, but on that's not a new question. That's not a digital question either. We are depending on other countries for food. We are depending on other countries for energy, and the growing tensions internationally over the last years have made these points more salient. But I don't think that captures entirely the debate around digital sovereignty, because of at least two reasons. One reason is, as I mentioned, that sovereignty is used by different countries to mean different things, usually the things they want it to mean. It's a political tool that they use to enforce or legalize activities that would otherwise not be legal or not be considered authorized. But the second reason is that we have now a level of technology in terms of data protection, and that includes encryption, but not only encryption, that makes it difficult to force another country to comply with your legal requirements. Say you have you want to access someone else's data. It might be on your territory, it might be on someone else's territory. But if this data is protected by technical means, it might require technical means to get the data out. And to some extent, that is, it's equivalent to having a requirement that the data you access is out of any safe or any encryption layer. And you cannot ask that as of today for many reasons. But one of the reasons you can't ask that is if a country were to accept this deal, what do they get in return? Why would they comply with a request to hand over data that is on their territory to a third party, to a different country? And that's the debate about digital sovereignty, at least to some degree, which is not only how much we need to be self-sustaining and self-sufficient in terms of technology, but also why would we agree to collaborate with other countries on these matters? And that's a big question. I don't have an answer to it, but that's a big question.
Thanks a lot for that. And Robin told me that one of the attendees has a really, really good question, and the fact that it might seem that we miss the main point on the digital sovereignty topic. So that's very interesting to see different approaches. And the idea is apparently, or at least for this one, it's useless to discuss about this if nation states are not able to enforce rules on what the citizens do or see over the internet, impose rules to the foreign tech country, especially big tech coming from US, China, or some others, I guess, which are supplying vital services to the citizens. Encryption gets in the way of both these key requirements, and this is why there's a tension between ubiquitous encryption and digital sovereignty. So sorry to not taking the shortcut to the following of the discussion, but Robin, you raised this point, so maybe we can have the part of the panelists on this one.
Sure. Yes. So, Vittorio, I think that's, it raises really interesting and relevant questions, and it's sort of related both to what Remi was just saying, and also to the point made further down in the chat by Rufo Guareschi about national digital sovereignty or regional versus global communication and individual sovereignty. So these, as you say, these are the sort of nexus of this set of problems. I mean, to take some real examples, if you attend the OECD's meetings on cross-border data transfers, for example, on security and privacy of information, the overriding principle, which generally comes in the first sentence of any document or agreement they make on this, is that all else being equal, nothing should impede the free flow of data across borders. Well, if that's your starting point, that already colors the picture in a certain way, because you're starting with the idea that data transfers essentially should not recognize borders. Well, okay, technically that may in fact be the de facto case, but as you say, it raises a lot of issues about jurisdictional reach, both in and out. And what I mean by that is, if the data of your citizens is actually all held in another country, how can you adequately protect your citizens' interests? And second, if other countries have the ability to reach into your country and access the data of your citizens at will, again, how can you protect both your citizens and your national interest? Now, again, to take a really practical example, the argument that I've seen repeatedly over the last 5 years, especially from the US and especially from the FBI, for example, is that they will say, we acknowledge the technical capabilities that encryption provides to the individual, but it must not, and these are their words, it must not be possible to put data beyond the reach of a lawfully served warrant. So you should not have the technical means, they say, to put data beyond the reach of law enforcement. Well, okay, within a jurisdiction, maybe that's simply the policy they wish to adopt. Between jurisdictions, it becomes more problematic because, for example, suppose you have an authoritarian regime which has passed a law saying we can have access to, for example, the social media records of people who we consider to be dissidents, and those dissidents happen to be in your country. You may be served with a lawfully processed warrant in the jurisdiction of origin that says that they want you to bug or intercept the communications of those alleged dissidents who happen to be in your country. So yes, these start to raise real questions of individual sovereignty and self-determination and the ability of governments to control what happens within their own jurisdictions.
I think here we raised the point of principles, rules, and the difference that we might have between a state of led by politics only, by individuals' will, and also a state that is ruled by regulations which are discussed in open space. And it's why it's, for me, the perfect way to move slowly toward a direction when we talk about EU sovereignty, for example, in terms of encryption. There's one of two regulations that are popping in mind, such as the GDPR and also Schrems, which are interesting because it says that, okay, based on the idea that our data are not located in the EU, either we keep them in the EU, so Schrems and GDPR, or we're going to extend the EU regulation. And that's a dual approach. That's also an idea that might be really, really powerful, because under the idea of regulations, there are, as I mentioned, the principles, and it's a form of diplomacy. So between keeping data at home and protecting them abroad, what is for you not the best approach, but once again, your thoughts and maybe your feedback on this. This time we might try with you first, Remi, if you wish.
Okay, so it's a broad set of questions. I think I'd address it simply by I think I just addressed the point that you distinguish data at home versus data abroad. Technology doesn't know borders. So if we wish to protect, and I mean, attackers don't know borders either. So if we wish to protect data, we need to do it in a way that is itself sufficient to deter at least attackers from any country, any jurisdiction, whatever the means they have. And attackers, by definition, are not operating within the boundaries of what law agrees or allows. So this sets a baseline. If we don't protect data enough, then some attacker somewhere will get it. Some attacker somewhere will use it, be it just a mafia or be it some sort of state-backed attacker. I don't know. So this baseline is something that many countries have debated over the years, because it may happen that their own means of interception and of data recovery are not as good as the attackers. And so they don't want anyone to have a high baseline, because then they can't read it. But some other countries are fairly happy with a high baseline, because their own capabilities are much higher. And that's part of the debate, is that we're not all equal in terms of technological knowledge and technological capability, in terms of computation capability. Japan, the United States, and Russia have huge computational power, and most of Africa and most of Central Asia don't have any way to access that. So they have to resort to means of coercion at best, or they have to outlaw any kind of technological protection right away, because otherwise they just renounce their ability to read the data that they want to access.
So that's definitely a regulation that is helping the most prepared. And maybe, Alban, you would like to share something with us?
Yes, indeed. Thanks a lot. So that's a very interesting question, actually, regarding to EU data sovereignty. First of all, I would like to, I observed that actually, if we look back in time over the last decades, actually, we see a clear trend to data isolation instead of total free flow of data. And actually, the really starting point I see is really the advent of the GDPR, which actually was the first, I would say, first attempt of extraterritorial law in the digital age and digital field. Afterwards, so what would be the best option to ensure protection of data encryption or data allocation? I would say both, actually. I don't see any silver bullet. Indeed, encryption is very convenient because it protects data against hacker or anyone that would be interested in trying to capture it. Unfortunately, it raises some question in particular if those data are to be exchanged over country or very different country, or I would say different areas, US, Russia, Europe, and so on and so forth, which actually may have quite substantial different rules of cryptography. And for instance, in some countries, some type of cryptography may be used, may be allowed. In some others, some would not. Some country would impose nationally developed software, some not. But we could globally weaken the overall security of data. So I'm not convinced that encryption, at least when we consider exchanging data over a large area, is the best solution. Definitely the trend I see, both from a market perspective and from a regulatory perspective, at least in Europe, we're going definitely towards data allocation in Europe and by companies that are ruled by European law. This is very clear over the last year, and is getting even more pregnant, and is getting even more faster.
Interesting. Robin, if you would like to add something.
Yeah, this is a really tricky area at the border between what you can achieve through technical means and what you can only solve through some kind of procedural or legal agreements. In other words, policy and procedural means. I must admit, I am very uneasy about solutions based on the principle of geolocation of data. I think it sets us off down a pathway where all of a sudden the internet is no longer has the goal or intent of being global and homogeneous, but instead is built up of patches, and between some of those patches there are essentially one-way valves, and just as an internet bigot, that doesn't sound great to me. And I admit that's a bigotry, you know, that's but I think that there are some real technical and practical problems here, and one of them is one that I've been ranting about for about 16 years. It's what I call privacy beyond first disclosure. Okay, and the idea is this: if I want to send Remi an encrypted email and I don't want Grégory to see the contents, okay, I encrypt it and I send it to Remi. But in order for Remi to read the contents, I have to give him the means to decrypt the message. So Remi decrypts the message, at which point I no longer have any technical protection of that message. And so if Remi decides that what he wants to do is disclose the contents to Grégory, I can't stop that. And so whether you rely on data encryption or, for instance, perhaps you might say, if you are confiding data to a service that you know will store it offshore, you must encrypt it, and the keys to that encryption must be in a key store that is physically located in your jurisdiction. Okay, you can do that, but if you want someone to use the data in question, you have to give them the means to decrypt it. And at that point, your technical protection is forfeit. So this is the problem of privacy beyond first disclosure is one that you can't solve technically. You have to look to other means to solve it. You can help the non-technical means to work, for example, by encapsulating the data in a form that makes it what they would call tamper evident. This a bit like the cellophane on a packet of cigarettes. It doesn't prevent someone from getting at the cigarettes, but it tells you if the packet has been tampered with. But even so, if I want the recipient to be able to unpack the data and read it, that cellophane may be broken in the course of doing that anyway. So this is just an indicative technology. It's not a robust one.
It's really great as you are highlighting. Here we are facing some brand new challenges, because in the physical world, if you open something, it's open forever, or if you tell me something, I can do whatever I want with this information. But here in the internet, and you are a very nice representative or representatives of this idea of having both a good way at least to master your privacy, your data, but also to remain open. It's why it leads me to this other question: how to further sovereignty and avoid protectionism and limiting the openness of internet and services. You already replied to part of this question, but maybe you can push a little bit further, if you may.
Sorry, was that to me or?
That's a good question, Robin. If you want to start.
No, please. For one of the other interviews, because I was mesmerized by one of Paolo's questions in the chat. I apologize.
Yeah, I can say that you have quite a vivid discussion here. Okay, so Alban, if you may.
Yes. So it's true that it's not that convenient to gather those two objectives. So one of the first would be to ensure standards. I mean, to have standards. So standards at least could define a common technical implementation that could help and support infrastructure that supports those privacy and means. Nevertheless, again, I still remain convinced that actually free flow of data, even with encryption, remain hard to ensure. And then definitely, if we look back, we see that the trend goes to territoriality of data. And the main, there are two major trends that goes in that direction, so that we can see worldwide. This is data protection regulation, so Europe was at the forefront, but other areas have enacted their own regulation to protect data, and usually that leads to keep data on the territory. We see it in China. And also the big set of public policies are the one pertaining to cybersecurity, which actually create another wall in the digital world, in the IT infrastructure, that also hamper and limit the interconnection of system and also exchange and free flow of data. So we see it in Europe. We had the NIS1, NIS2. There are also such regulation in other countries. And definitely, I think that the question is somehow answered and solved. I think those are very, very heavy trends that for sure will keep on growing, because we see that the risk on the cyberspace are becoming bigger and bigger. And I think tomorrow maybe we may see major crisis on the cyberspace. So there was the attack on TV5 a few years ago, which I think was something that was made known to the public and one very visible. But maybe some other such crisis occurred without anyone knew anything about it. Things are considered very seriously by some countries and by armies. And in that regards, I think we should, and at least in Europe, we should develop our own capacities to ensure to be totally independent in the domain of cloud and secure storage of data. So we see some initiative on the market. And over the last 6 months, we saw some actors, European actors, teaming up with big US companies to develop their European clouds. So we saw it in France, we saw it also in Germany. We have a similar initiative in Italy. And actually here the idea is to accompany the migration of European companies towards cloud, because the big migration has not really started. The big migration of companies of storage of data to the cloud, it hasn't started yet. And actually we see all the actors getting ready to capture this migration. So I'm thinking about private actors to develop a national or European offer, but also member states and regulatory authorities that are also enacting regulation to set up rules to ensure a minimum level of protection of data. For instance, in mind, the case of a country that actually requires at least a minimum level of protection of data, of companies' data, to ensure actually they are protected against extraterritorial law.
Makes sense. Before coming back to the cloud migration and the question of data protection as such, maybe Remi, you would like to say something, because I can see that Robin, you're quite busy right now.
Well, I should say two things. First thing is, I'm not going to take any political stance on whether sovereignty is good, bad, or whether we should or should not pursue it. That's not my role. I can merely tell you what it would entail, what the risks it comes with, or what solutions it provides, but that's at best. The second thing I want to say is, essentially, underneath it all, there's a matter of not putting all our eggs in the same basket, and that's part of the concern that has been brought up today. Is that if we put everything in one place and in one basket, and that basket crashes, well, too bad for us. So part of, I wouldn't say a solution, but part of an argument that could be made to ensure sovereignty is that rather than locating everything in one place, and that place being home, maybe we should also be open to the possibility of putting our eggs in several baskets, putting data not only with our allies, but also with people that we don't consider to be our allies, in such a way that you need these people to collaborate together to break the security. So one typical example of that is, actually I have a paper on that from some time ago. You can split up data in a secure way in 3 bits, in 3 parts, and you would need the 3 parts together to recover anything at all. If you just have 2 parts or 1 part, you don't get any data. So what you could do is you could set one piece of data in Qatar and have it held there, one piece of data in the US, one piece of data you keep with yourself. And so you know that each of these countries individually could not do anything, and they would need to share whatever they know before they can get to a point where they can read your data. Fine. But what guarantees they don't get together? What guarantees that when you think it's Qatar, it's actually in Qatar? It's not an Amazon server, which is actually in the US. Because that's actually what's happening today. Is, except in a few select countries, such as Russia, you don't have very much any guarantee that data is stored anywhere, I mean, geographically, specifically speaking. So it's a double-edged sword, in the sense that technology can help you, but only to the extent that it actually doesn't give any guarantees of geolocation. And the moment we start putting data on premises somewhere we know it is, we can actually try to use it, or it's actually paving the way for broader and more impactful attacks. So the general position you can take on this is a bit of a lukewarm conclusion, at least on my side. Sovereignty does not solve the problem. I mean, there are several notions of sovereignty, but it doesn't really solve any kind of problem on the attacker side. It does not help law enforcement as much as it claims to do, but it puts data at risk in several ways if we try to achieve it by removing protections instead of adding them.
Really interesting thought, and maybe because I'm located in Luxembourg, but when you're talking about common interests of protecting the data and this ability to locate data, even what you might consider a foe, or like someone who is not sharing the same principles, let's say, I'm thinking about financial market, because that's definitely a type of ID where everyone has interest in keeping it as something secure, as something that is not going to be obliterated or manipulated, because most of us, by a direct or indirect way, have interest of having more or less stable and growing financial market. So maybe reaching this level, and it's why I see Hervé, and I think in the chat is mentioning something that might go in the direction of the blockchain. This decentralization will be of the internet, but also of data location. Maybe Robin, you would like to get back with the panelists?
I never left, honest. Okay. I mean, in some ways I'm ambivalent about this. We have to be very careful what we wish for. I do like the idea of distributing data so that, for instance, more than one jurisdiction would have to cooperate in order to reassemble what it is they're trying to get hold of. If I didn't like that idea, I wouldn't use a VPN endpoint located outside the UK, because that's precisely the point. I want them to have to go to someone in another jurisdiction with whom ideally they don't have a sort of data extradition treaty in order to eavesdrop on my VPN traffic. So I like it from that point of view. I get nervous about advocating the distribution of key parts or parts of secrets, purely because if we start to say that that's a really good way to protect data, someone is going to turn around and say, brilliant, let's use that for key escrow. Let us split key parts in and have an N of M key part sharing scheme where you have to go to a judge and you have to go to a policeman and you have to go to an ISP or whatever. And I really don't want to set off down that road. I don't think that systems like that will end up workable. And I think they multiply points of failure. And I think that, so the point of failure argument here is that this data distribution and decentralization approach works pretty well for data at rest, as long as I have control over the keys, but it's really bad for data in motion. You can't process the data or shift it if it's all scattered across to the four winds. So I don't think it would, in the long term, prevent for the sake of argument, a totalitarian government from going after any point in the life cycle of that data where it was gathered in one place. So at the point where you wanted to conduct a financial transaction, you had to get the bits and pieces together, they would jump on that point. So I like the theory, I like the principle. I don't think it delivers workable protection for data in motion.
I'm a huge fan of hard science fiction. So if we go in the most dystopic world, taking just a few words, such as data, cloud.
I live in it. Sorry, I mean, since 2016, that's where I've been.
So let's just say that what might be definitely the worst case scenario, and let's be a little bit creative here, because usually when we talk about digital sovereignty, there's one thing that we're a little bit afraid to talk about. It's just, as we already mentioned, if we use it in the worst case scenario, it might be bad. So just to wrap it up, to discuss a bit and to leave you like some free time, let's say, to express some ideas, what could be the worst case scenario, and at the opposite, what will be the direction towards which you would like to go? Alban, maybe if you want to.
Yes, so
that's a big one, sorry for that.
What would be the worst scenario? So I think I agree with what the said before. So the worst scenario was definitely to have a single point of failure or a few single point of failure where we would have huge points where all the data are concentrated, are stored, and actually would be vulnerable to captured by third party, but also to destruction. Because here in our digital age, data are really gold. And actually, I think we might be very vulnerable in case of loss of data. Because if we look around, most of added value and startups and new businesses are built upon exploitation of data. And for sure, it will become even more important in the future. So definitely that would be one of the worst scenarios. And I think we should plan to ensure redundancy and protection of data, which I think is somehow a new shift in our mindset. In a physical world, we were thinking about physical goods that we were trying to protect. And actually all our jurisdiction law were built upon that, around that. Here, what has values is data, which is totally intangible. And we have to think how to protect it and organize redundancy in many countries in different places. Another part of the worst scenario would be, I think, widespread use of encryption, which actually is made or actually doesn't protect as good as we expect, and that actually could be exploited by third parties so that everyone could be spied without us knowing it. I think you see what I mean. And I think we have to do something against it. And I think we have to regain some sovereignty also in the field of encryption in Europe. If we look a bit in the field of cryptography, be it the design, being the standardization, being the implementation and provision of softwares, I think we are also largely dependent in Europe of a non-European solution. And I think we can't blame, we are not allowed to blame being potentially spied or against our will if we're not able to be also autonomous on that, autonomous on self-design cryptography, self-design standards, self-design implementation, and on top of that, to use it, to make it compulsory to use European design security products in Europe, which actually is what US does. Huh?
That's a really good start. So yeah, Remi, please.
Yeah, if I may just react on that, I'm sorry, I'm a cryptographer. I can't allow you to say that. For the first time in this panel, I'm going to disagree very, very frontally with what Alban just said. The standards in cryptography today that are in use everywhere are made in Europe. Not designed in the US, not designed in Russia or China, and they are mandatory in most applications today, be it the AES designed in part by Remi, which was in the previous panel, be it SHA-3, which is also part of the design committee, so you can tell you about that. Most of the post-quantum candidates are pushed by European teams, and we have an excellent research record on this. So I can't let someone say that we are not self-sufficient in terms of cryptography. Pretty much all the cryptography designed and used in the world today is made either in France, Belgium, perhaps Germany, and that's about it.
I have to say a point then, just to enter into, to jump in the discussion, if I may. We design it, but if I remember, it's the NIST who implemented it as a standard. So that's maybe one of the biggest issues, because a lot of universities, a lot of state members, a lot of great minds, but maybe a little bit of a lack of collaboration sometimes. So Remi, maybe you can go back on the worst and bad scenario, worst and the worst and worst, but worst and best.
I'm not going to take any stance on what's good or bad. I'm not a philosophy professor. What I can tell you, I can tell you what I fear and what I see. I think that we are, from a cryptography standpoint, we are reaching a point where the technology, and I want to bring the debate back on encryption, technology is so strong that governments start fearing it, in the sense that we now are reaching a point where we actually know how to do it, which for the first time in history, we actually don't know how to break it efficiently. What that means is that for a very limited point very restricted time in history, we actually have something that works. And we are talking about dismantling it precisely because of this. Of course, I don't think it's the rational thing to do in general, but maybe there are good reasons to think about it. And I would like to give a parallel, perhaps that would strike you as more obvious. We are fighting, when designing cryptography or security in general, we are fighting something that we don't control. We're fighting either new attackers, new technology to attack, or new policies sometimes. And we have very limited means to do that. We have math and some computer science, and that's the only thing we're allowed to use, really. So it's very similar to what you do when you try to design a vaccine against a new disease that just appeared out of nowhere. So you design the vaccine and you do everything you can to try and design your own version of vaccine because you don't trust the others to do the right thing with the vaccine design. And you try to be the one selling it because, of course, you want to make some profit out of it. Now imagine that at this point, some country tells you, well, okay, you have a vaccine, but please don't use it because in some very limited cases, I can't, even if I have a lawful reason for that, I can't prevent the vaccine from working on this person who I suspect to be criminal. So please make a vaccine that works for everyone except this guy. That's essentially part of the debate around encryption and sovereignty. Is I want the vaccine to work when I want it to work, but I don't want it to work on some. But the same technology, it's the same problem. Technology does not have borders, I said earlier. Technology does not comply with who you like and who you don't like. And I think it's something that evades most of the political discussion about this, is we can't afford to dismantle cryptography. Too much rests on it. Too much in the world rests on signature and hashing functions and encryption. And it's not the 3 or 4 cases that law enforcement could solve every year, if it could break it, that will change this balance, in my opinion, personal opinion.
Thanks a lot. Strong opinion and really well served. So Robin, hard task of yours to wrap it up a little bit, and then I would like to thank you all.
Tricky, hard acts to follow both. Well, look, as you've no doubt gathered by now, I'm definitely a glass half full kind of guy, but the glass is half full of cyanide. So I'll try to give the optimistic view and the pessimistic. So my dystopia is where there is panopticality. Someone else can see everything about me. In my dystopia, there is subjective, that there are laws that allow subjective enforcement or suppression of speech, for example, to say you can't say that because it's lawful, but it's harmful. I don't like it, therefore I'm going to make it a criminal offense. In my dystopia, I am made vulnerable to the acts of criminals and hostile governments. Including through things like insecure connected objects that can have effect in the real world, like connected vehicles or connected CCTV or door locks. And in my dystopia, I have loss of self-determination. Well, looking at that list, it looks a lot like what's in the online safety bill in the UK, because it delivers pretty much all of those things to government. And so that's part of the reason for my underlying current of pessimism. The thankfully empty half of the glass that doesn't have any cyanide in it is what I would like to see. I would like to see reliable open source crypto backed up by an assurance scheme and used by services and products in which I can have good reason to have trust. I want to know what the trust is based on, and I want that to be open to inspection. I would like to see artificial intelligence put to my service as my proxy for decisions about my online security and privacy, not because I think it would necessarily do a better job, but because it would do at least as good a job as me, and I don't have to go around turning cookies off all the time and setting privacy settings. So to have both security and convenience. And lastly, in short, what those things deliver for me is agency in the online world. They deliver to me the ability to control my own destiny personally and to go safely around the online world and to be safe in the real world that is physically affected by the digital one.
Both scary and full of hope. So I will have to stop on that to thank you all, because I will be able to discuss with you during way more minutes, but to listen to you for hours. So we have to leave the floor to the next panelist. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for the time that you dedicated to that. Thanks also to the participants who made this discussion and also the chat quite active. And I'll leave the floor for the next one. Thanks to all of you.